Hi, PerspectaWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Wednesday, September 12th. Major Hurricane Florence continues to churn to the west-northwest. This morning at a pretty good clip, running along at about 17 miles per hour. It is currently Category 4 status, major hurricane status, with maximum sustained winds around 130 miles per hour. It very well could continue to maintain major hurricane status as it heads towards the border region between North and South Carolina. It'll arrive in that border region of North and South Carolina by early Friday, and then become influenced by a very strong upper level ridge to the north that will cause it to stall out and eventually just crawl southwestward down along the Carolina coastline, and that will allow for an extended period of heavy rainfall and strong winds, especially in the coastal regions of South and North Carolina. Some areas could end up getting 2 feet of rain out of this system over the next several days. Eventually, by the latter part of the weekend, early part of next week, Florence will cut inland and probably as far south as moving over Georgia, and then it'll start to loop back around first to the northwest and to the north and then to the northeast, and likely we'll have to deal with Florence until the middle part of next week, at which time it is likely to exit off the U.S. East Coast. The heaviest rainfall for the D.C., Philadelphia, New York City corridor from what will become the remains of Florence, likely not until next Tuesday or Wednesday, at which time it may begin to interact with the frontal system. But again, we'll have to be dealing with Florence over the next several days. This is the climatological peak time of year for the Atlantic Basin tropical season, the middle part of September, and certainly this year is holding true to form. Lots of players on the tropical scene this morning. Let's talk about the others before we focus in on Florence. First of all, Tropical Storm Isaac will continue to move to the west into the Caribbean Sea. It is likely to weaken some over the next few days as it moves into the Caribbean Sea. Whether or not it survives or not is still a little unclear. Meanwhile, there is another tropical system that could very well strengthen into tropical storm status over the next day or two as it heads west-northwestward towards Texas. It could cause some heavy rainfall in Texas, Louisiana, and then eventually it'll probably loop back around to the east and could be hanging around the southeastern U.S. coastline in the middle or latter part of next week. Could even have an interaction with what will become the remains of Florence next week. Meanwhile, Helene is a hurricane, but is moving relatively north or northwest over the next few days, and then it'll take a turn to the north and east, avoiding any closeness to the U.S. coastline. Eventually could have an impact on the United Kingdom in several days. Now let's focus in on Florence, again moving west-northwest this morning at 17 miles per hour. It'll arrive right in this region, right here, the border region of South and North Carolina, probably early Friday, and grind to a halt thanks to very strong blocking high-pressure ridges in the upper part of the atmosphere over the northeastern part of the U.S., southeastern Canada, the northwest part of the Atlantic. At that time, it'll start to turn to the southwest and drift, basically crawl along the Carolina coastline over the next few days, and then making a turn inland in a weakened state, moving over Georgia, and then eventually looping back around to the east in this fashion. And again, the biggest rainfall from what will become the remains of Florence for D.C. to New York City region may very well hold off until next Tuesday or Wednesday as this finally exits the U.S. East Coast, perhaps east, moving east over the Delmarva Peninsula in the Tuesday-Wednesday time frame of next week. Well, here's the very latest still satellite image of Hurricane Florence. Main thing I want to point out here is it has become a large hurricane. It certainly is a well designed hurricane right now, running at full throttle, Category 4 status, symmetrical, has a well-defined eye, and is moving west-northwest again, right towards the North Carolina, South Carolina border region, likely to arrive in that area somewhere in the early hours of Friday. It actually may stall out before it moves over land. That's still a little uncertain at this time. It could slow down to a crawl and start to move southwest along the Carolina coastline during the day on Friday. Whether it comes inland at the initial push is still a little unclear. Certainly, whether or not it does that, it'll cause some tremendous rainfall and strong winds, especially in coastal sections of the Carolinas. But given the fact that it's so strong and so large of a system, it'll have a lot of impact inland as well. And then it'll continue to creep southwestward down along the coastline, perhaps moving over Georgia during the latter part of the weekend or the early part of next week. Now here's a satellite imagery loop from the GO-16 NOAA satellite, and it moves from a visible type of image to an infrared type of image in the overnight hours, back to a visible. A very spectacular looking storm right now. Again, Category 4 major hurricane right now. It has a well-defined eye moving steadily to the west-northwest. Again, the last reading was at 17 miles per hour. It will slow down to a crawl once it arrives in the Carolina coastal region by the early morning hours of Friday, perhaps late Thursday night, and begin to crawl southwestward down along the Carolina coastline during the latter part of the week and into the weekend. But again, here's the latest infrared satellite imagery loop of Hurricane Florence as it continues to churn towards the U.S. Carolina coastline. Well, we've talked for the past several days about the potential for tremendous rainfall amounts from Hurricane Florence, basically because it will be grinding to a halt. This is the latest 7-day forecast map from NOAA in terms of rainfall potential, and it's really showing a color I've never seen on this particular map, pink here, which is 20 inches or higher, and that is certainly within the realm of possibility here along the Carolina coastline over the next few days, given the fact that Florence will move right to the Carolina coastline, probably in this region right here, and then grind to a halt and just creep down the coastline for the next couple of days. Again, eventually moving over Georgia and then looping back to the east. Now, the heaviest rainfall, again, on this particular map and in the future here for the D.C., Philadelphia, New York City corridor will likely come Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. Doesn't mean we won't get some rain out of the outer bands of Florence over the next few days, but again, the looping fashion of this back to the east eventually will probably bring the heaviest rainfalls to the I-95 corridor sometime next week, probably Tuesday, Wednesday time frame. Right now I'm thinking finally this will exit off the U.S. East Coast around the middle part of next week. Now, late next week, there'll still be some tropical activity hanging around the southeast coastline, but we'll worry about that then. Again, this is the very latest 7-day outlook here with the heaviest rainfall confined to the Carolinas for now, but again, there can be some significant rain even north into the Mid-Atlantic region as late as Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. But the bullseye right along the Carolina coastline, again, 2 feet of rain is possible, even some isolated higher amounts. Caroliners are certainly somewhat familiar with hurricanes. In fact, North Carolina has the second most hurricane hits following Florida. Probably the 2 benchmark hurricanes for the Carolinas are Hazel and Hugo. Hugo slammed into South Carolina in 1989, and Hazel slammed into the same kind of region we're looking at here, the North Carolina, South Carolina region, in 1954. Those 2 hurricanes were not stalling out, however. They were moving at a pretty good clip when they slammed into South Carolina in the case of Hugo, and the Carolina border region in the case of Hazel way back in 1954. This, on the other hand, will grind to a halt right over the Carolina coastline. Well, let's wrap up by looking at last night's 0Z European model run. This is all these maps available come from WSI Incorporated. We'll just kind of walk through slowly and look at the track of Hurricane Florence, again, in last night's 0Z European model run. This is beginning tomorrow morning, however. This is Thursday morning Florence closing in, and we'll just progress slowly here. And notice here, arrival late Thursday night, early Friday morning. Here we are now, Friday morning, right along the North Carolina, South Carolina border region. And at that time, it becomes to get influenced by the strong upper level ridge to the north and grinds to a halt and turns around to the southwest. Notice here it's kind of drifting down or creeping down along the Carolina coastline. Here we are now into Saturday afternoon, still just off the Carolina coastline. Again, this is one model run, European model, which has had a pretty good handle on the situation here. And here we are now into Sunday morning, still sitting off the South Carolina, Georgia coastline at this time. And of course, this will allow for an extended period of heavy rain and strong winds along the Carolina coastline to the eastern part of Georgia by the latter part of the weekend. And the European model then moves it inland over Georgia by the latter part of the weekend and even into the early part of next week. This is now Monday. And then it ultimately will start to loop around into towards the east. And here we go here now. This is now the middle part of next week, still dealing with the remains of Florence. And again, there may be a frontal system that's interacting with this, and ultimately it moves to the east off probably the Delmarva Peninsula coastline the middle part of next week, perhaps as late as Thursday morning of next week or so. And finally, it gets on out of here east of the coastline by the latter part of next week. But at that time, we may have to deal with some more tropical activity down along the southeastern coastline. So again, the summary is major Hurricane Florence, a very large storm right now, Category 4, moving at a good clip right now towards the North Carolina, South Carolina border region. It should arrive right around there early Friday and grind to a halt, and then slowly push southwest along the Carolina coastline over the next few days, causing an extended period of heavy rainfall and strong winds for especially for coastal sections of the Carolinas. Eventually, it moves inland, perhaps over Georgia, and it takes a loop back to the east, and the D.C., New York City corridor could actually get the heavy rains from what will become the remains of Florence next week, perhaps in the Tuesday, Wednesday time frame. That's it for now. For PerspectaWeather.com, I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian.